Welcome back, everyone, to the Inspiring Leadership Book Club 2022 edition, or whenever people may be watching it, likely in 2022. I'm Andrew Cohen. Good to be back with you. And I'm very excited about today's session because we have with us live in our studio, virtual as it is, Kelly Wendorf, consultant coach and author of the book that was released, I think, just about a year ago, Kelly, right?
Mhm.
Called Flying Lead Change 56 Million Years of Wisdom for Leading and Living. Highly, highly recommended. And we'll be spending the next 15 minutes or so talking about some of the wisdom in that book, the process of writing that book, and also hopefully if you'll share with us, Kelly, a little bit about yourself. Quickly, by way of introduction, Kelly's a master certified coach, author, an entrepreneur, educator, thought leader, and an expert in the art form of taking people through transformational change on a number of different levels. She's the founder of Equus, which sounds like horse. I think that might be a theme somewhat in this conversation. She's the founder of Equus, a leadership development organization that specializes in evidence-based approaches to learning. She works with clients remotely all over the world and also on her small ranch outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, with her six equines. Equines.
Depends on your region. Equines is just
There you
fine.
go.
Yeah.
Equines, exactly. And her work's been featured in Forbes, Vogue, HuffPost, New York Times, and the book is getting some great attention as well. And thank you for participating in this. And I really look forward to hearing more about you and this book. So, you know, 56 million years of wisdom for leading and living. I'm not going to ask you what flying lead change means. I feel like I want to ask people to read the book.
Yeah,
You
we
might
can save that as a surprise.
you might be asked that all the time. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you've read your share of leadership books. We've had conversations about leadership and coaching. And just to be clear to the audience, Kelly has coached me several times, virtually and with her horses. It's unbelievable. But you're a student of leadership and leadership books. What's different about this? Why does the world? Well, I don't want to say why. I'm tell us why the world needs this book. But what's different about this?
Well, thanks, Andrew, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's great. It's great to hang out with you in this way. For me, I think I'll just start at my education, which was really unconventional. My father was a archaeologist, and he ran the laboratory of anthropology here in New Mexico for a number of years, and so that gave me a really different lens through which to view life, especially as a young person, because he took me all over the world to his digs. You know, we didn't do family trips. We didn't go to Disney. We didn't do holidays. We just spent time going to different places around the world where he would be immersed in his work. And so my days were spent in the field with ancient artifacts, with old and ancient things amongst indigenous peoples. And it had an impact on me, primarily an understanding that um, sort of how we had translated being alive in contemporary settings was in many ways there's a lot that's happening for us that's fabulous, like technology and all the problems that we've solved, but also in many ways we've departed from a certain kind of sanity that I felt was and continue to feel was intrinsic in those more ancient sort of ways, those nature based ways. And so as an adult, I was really curious about how does that kind of indigenous, ancient, earth based wisdom inform some of our really complex challenges today. And so I started to look into the field of what's called biomimicry. And some people know what that term means, and some people don't. For those that haven't heard it before, biomimicry is using the intelligence of nature's wisdom to help inspire problem solving to any kind of application. So we often think of biomimicry in terms of how we might develop a product or how we might design a structure or a building. And And one of the best examples of biomimicry is with the Japanese bullet train that would sort of hurtle across the landscape at these really amazing speeds. But a problem happened when the train would enter into a tunnel. A sonic boom would erupt, and so this was super disruptive to the neighborhoods. So the engineers decided to look to nature to see how nature solved that problem. Surely there was a simile in that issue that nature has solved in all of its 3.8 billion years. And sure enough, they found that there's a bird, a kingfisher, that when it hurtles through the air and then through an enormous velocity, and then the pressure changes when it goes into the water, that the shape of the bird's head meant that he could enter into the water without making a splash, and then he wouldn't scare the fish. And so the engineers changed the front of the train to mimic the skull of the heron, and problem solved. Not only was there no longer a sonic boom, but the train went faster and was a lot more efficient in terms of fuel. So that's one example of biomimicry. How I use biomimicry is to access nature's wisdom for social innovation. And how does 3.8 billion years approach social issues, leadership issues, survival issues? And primarily, I've turned to the horse, who's one of the oldest, most successful mammals on the planet. They're 56 million years old. I think they're beat by the platypus and the echidna, who are 150 million years old.
Wait,
Um,
I'm sorry, an echidna?
an echidna, sort of like a
What's that?
porcupine, but a little
Ah,
less. Yeah.
I
Anyway,
grew up in New York. We don't
they're
have
not as
echidnas in New York.
relatable as a horse, and they're hard to keep in the fence. So, but 56 million is a pretty good track record. So that means that that species, that system, if you want to look at it that way, which I think is a much more effective way to look at it, rather than looking at the sentimental feelings we have about horses. If you look at the horse herd as a system, you've got a system that has survived tectonic shifts and climate spikes and comets and volcanic explosions and pandemics. And they are here today thriving. And not many people know this, but of all the species that have ever been on Earth, 99% are extinct. So the 1% that remain are the survivors. And we have a lot to learn about how they solve problems in ways that we haven't even conceived of, because we, have not been around that long. So when it comes to leadership, and we see how a horse herd system works in leadership, I have found that their way of leading is far more trustworthy and far more effective than a mere thousands-year-old military structure, which is what informs our leadership and our business schools and our leadership practices and all of the concepts that go in that. So it's kind of a radical reframe, but I've found that it's very effective.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So how, just picking up on something you just shared, when you talk about it's the horse's way of leading is more trustworthy and is effective. Could you share a story, say with a client or a group, no names, of course, that you may have worked with, where some of the learnings they may have taken away from some of these experiences with you?
Yeah. So, okay. So, one that comes to mind, we had a company that had just been bought out by a Japanese firm, and the new CEO came to the States from Tokyo. And he was with his new leadership team here stateside. And we were doing an exercise. We had the whole herd, and one of the principles of leadership from a equine point of view is that the leader is not out front leading. The leader isn't the most charismatic. The leader isn't the one who's got all the answers, who's the most powerful and domineering and aggressive, like we've been taught in Hollywood. That whole stallion thing who runs the harem of mares is just a myth. um, so the leader is much more a servant leader that positions themselves both physically and energetically alongside or even behind. And what that does is it helps the ones in their charge to be out front, thereby gaining more confidence, which creates a legacy of confidence building throughout generations of people in an organization or horses in a herd. And so the exercise that they were doing was about positioning oneself alongside the horse to lead, but allowing the horse to be a little bit out front. And a lot happens because when you're doing experiential work like this, it bypasses the neocortex of our brain that wants to sort of be resistant to this new way of learning. And it kind of flies under the radar of that neocortex, and people learn things with their bodies in spite of their biases, in spite of, their resistances. And they get to have a felt sense of what it feels like to lead in a different way and to be successful at it. So this CEO, in spite of having it demonstrated to him, in spite of his direct reports doing it really well, he completely went onto automatic, pulled himself out front of the horse, grabbed the rope, and was like dragging this horse behind him and using an enormous amount of force. And the horse, in response, and this is what's so great about the horses, is they give you immediate feedback, immediate truthful feedback. The horse was sort of resistant and sort of pulling back and kind of lagging behind. And he's this tall, leggy, racy, shiny thoroughbred. And I was standing with one of the direct reports, and she's looking at the CEO and she's looking at the horse, and she goes, "Oh gosh, I guess that horse is really lazy." And I said, "Okay, I mean, do you think that this racy, leggy, shiny thoroughbred is lazy? Or is it the leadership that's happening?" You know? And he, after doing this for a while, realized that something wasn't right, partly because the feedback he's getting with the horse, partly because of the direct report starting to a little bit giggle. And he kind of looked and he went, "Oh my gosh, this is what I've been doing my whole life. I've just been out front doing all the hard work, pulling everyone along behind me, feeling like I'm the one that has to have all the answers, and it's not working." And he actually, in that moment, it was very, very vulnerable, especially for a man in that culture, to own that kind of, misstep and to own a new possibility for himself. So that's just one example.
Hmm. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Cool. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think if I recall correctly, you share that story in the book.
Uh-huh. I do. It's one of my
Great.
favorites.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. Um, it touches a little bit on this concept of power with as opposed to power over. Is that seems like that connects a little bit to that story with that particular Japanese CEO. Could you say a little bit more about that? And especially since, again, what I so appreciate about what you bring in your stories and in your teaching is the examples and how we can experience this. It's not just some conceptual thing with circles and arrows and boxes like these Western consultants love to do, but there's a visceral sense of what works and what doesn't. But I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about power with versus power over.
So, going back to nature again, systems that work within a power with, framework, cooperation, symbiosis, any of those kind of more cooperative ways of being with other species thrive more than ones who work in power over. The ones who are more competitive actually don't tend to endure over millions and billions of years. And power with is really more, it's more it's a more sustainable way of working with all kinds of energy systems, whether it's human capital or nature capital or energy capital or financial capital. Power with always sustains much better. The thing is that there's there's something that came in sometime around 2000 or so years ago, could be a little bit more, where we started to compete for resources. And so the paradigm of power over started to take over, and you can call it colonization, just to have a term to refer to. And colonization erupts in a system where something has broken. There's been a trauma, or there's been some kind of there's been a drought, there's been some kind of emergency, and so fear sets in. And then we have to have power over. We have to have power over others. We have to have power over our resources. um, and power over is very much the pervasive point of view and mindset that is in contemporary culture now. It's everywhere in all of our systems, in our education, in our political systems, in our corporate systems, and we're even taught in business school to leave our emotions and our intuition aside, to take advantage where we can take advantage, and to lead in a way that is around oppression and suppression, rather than collaborating with and lifting up, and creating an ecosystem of shared power with all. And so the horse herd is a power with system. And this might be a great time to pull up that Venn diagram that you have that's in the book about how the horse herd
Yeah.
operates.
Great. Let me do that quickly.
Yeah. Um, so a lot's been written in equine behavioral sciences around, how to make a horse jump higher and how to make him run faster, but not a lot's been written about their culture. They do have a culture, just like wolves and gorillas and who else has elephants have a culture. And not a lot's been written about this. This isn't known in conventional horse circles. But I've been working with horses since I was really tiny, and I think this is pretty solid. So basically, there's 7 premises that the horse culture is centered on. 5 core premises, and those 5 core premises, or values, you could say, are safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy. And so the lead horse, they are selected and appointed based on their ability to keep those 5 values intact. And they don't do it through domination and force. They do it through care and presence. So it's a servant model of leadership. It's the one who cares the most, not just for the individuals, but for the whole entirety of the herd and its entire system. And the one who can be the most present is the one who's selected to be leader. So it kind of flies in the face of a lot of conventional thinking about what leadership is. Again, though, 56 million years has shown that this really works. Um, and it also makes us question a lot of our practices and assumptions about what leadership is and what it requires. And I also stopped to think, if our schools were organized to support safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy through care and presence, if we selected our political leadership based on their ability to care the most and to be the most present, if we ran our organizations along these premises, what might be different in our world? And I'm curious to know, Andrew, when you were in the arena with the horses, how you experienced this model and how it informed your coaching. I know, like, I just threw that at you, but it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is a lot to think about. I mean, one thing I'd say, because there's a lot there. Well, I certainly observed and experienced the sense of safety. There was, I mean, the so you're talking about a situation where I entered into the arena with, I think it was 5 horses at the time, and they respond as they respond, right? They don't respond to my commands, um, hardly, even if I knew what to say, which I don't in the world of horses. So it's safety first, I suppose, is what thing that comes to mind for me. The I'm thinking about your model here. There was definitely a willingness for the horses to connect, as I observed, and tell me if I'm wrong. So there was a connection intention, there was a connection willingness, and it was not automatic. It was a connection that was contingent upon safety.
Mhm.
And I believe it was a connection that was contingent upon, well, not just safety, but, was it worth their time? One of the things I remember you're sharing with me before, as you prepared me for the experience, was that horses don't waste energy, right? Every move,
Right.
every word that they speak without speaking, or at least in a way that I can hear it as a human, is done with a purpose. So the connection can happen, but it's it's going to happen if certain kind of conditions are met, for lack of a better term. Am I making sense? As I hope that's
Mhm.
consistent with
Yeah.
your observation that way.
Yeah.
Um, I think about peace and this dimension of peace, and peace as I associate that personally, and I want to hear your thoughts about this, with almost like holding space.
Right.
There's an invitation to participate in the peace that the horses offer.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
makes me wonder whether platypuses do the same. I doubt it, but it makes me wonder. You talk about, no, but the opportunity to hold space, and I experience the horse as holding space for me.
Yes.
I believe in my training as a coach and my experience as a coach. I think that's part of what we do for our clients, is we
Right.
hold that space, whether we might call it peace, or we might call it just a place within which we can do our best thinking and
Mhm.
some accurate reflection and deeper reflection. So
Yeah.
certainly that dimension of peace was there. I'm curious to hear more about this word freedom and what that means. Like, how does the horse culture encourage freedom, and what does that freedom really mean?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. Um, so freedom is in some ways it's a result of living according to these principles and working according to these principles, and in some way informs all of these principles, which is why there's so many spirals and circles and things in that Venn diagram. Um, so this is freedom to be oneself, freedom to choose, freedom to say yes and to say no, freedom to express oneself as naturally as possible. Um, it's not, you could say it's freedom from oppression and suppression, but it's a much more sort of forward leaning sense of what you're free into as what is your unique gift in the world, what is your unique way of being that only you can express in the world, and how would it express absent a whole bunch of narratives that tell you about how you're supposed to be and when you're supposed to do it and how you're supposed to say it. So it's a little bit edgy because organizations like control.
Hmm.
Um, but what we you and I were talking the other day about this, the great resignation that's happened in the States, because and perhaps even worldwide, but specifically the States, because suddenly people have the freedom to choose. And it's not because they got an unemployment check. In fact, they still aren't going back to work, even though those checks have stopped coming. It's because the price that they were paying to have the work that they had was too high a price, and they got a taste of freedom to be who they are, a freedom to have more flexibility in their days, and they're starting to design lifestyles for themselves that are leaning into this freedom, and it's a whole movement without it even being an organized movement. And that's because our natural tendency, our biological wiring is towards freedom, is towards joy. So when you shape things to go in that direction, you gain a natural momentum that is life-giving and mutually supportive. Um, and so it's kind of cool that this little experiment is happening across America right now with the Great Resignation. That's an expression
Hmm.
of freedom. Yeah.
Cool. I was going to ask you, and I want to hold this example that you're giving here, but I was going to ask you if, according to the model, and the way you describe it in the book, where the chapters are for each of these dimensions, right?
Mhm.
That freedom is really, or perhaps, and I sound like I'm philosophizing a bit, so forgive me, but almost like the meaningful freedom is really only possible if there is safety and connection and peace.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
but if,
Safety
but
being
if that's
primary.
true,
Yeah.
hmm But if that's true, then does that mean that if there's additional freedom being exercised now by people with regard to their work and not going back to different jobs and maybe extending themselves into new, um, more open, more purpose-based work, something like that,
Mhm.
does that mean that people feel more safe and connected now?
This is just an assumption. I would say that, that it's an interesting arc to track because we were all thrown into extreme uncertainty, which
Yes.
felt very, very unsafe. And after crossing that threshold and seeing and people being forced to listen to some quieter voices that in themselves that perhaps they weren't able to hear before because they were on the hamster wheel and just that relentlessness that happens and just living paycheck to paycheck, that there was they were afforded a risk to listen to those voices, and I believe that those voices are inherently safe, that we know them to be true, that there's something about knowing that you wanna spend more time with your family, that you just cannot deny, that has it. And, I wanna make the distinction between safety and comfort. Often people confuse the 2. Um, it may not be comfortable to live a life according to your dreams or your ambitions or your authentic creation, but it is profoundly safe, right? And a lot of our society and our structures are set up to keep people comfortable. Um, but that's not necessarily in our best interest. That's just, it leans into, and this is a whole other topic, but it leans into comfort, leans into a way that we caretake a certain fragility that shows when we are in a power over framework. When we're with power over, we're very separate from one another. And when we're separate from one another, a kind of pervasive fragility sets in, a psychological fragility where we're afraid of conflict, we're afraid of risk, we're afraid to take chances, we're afraid to step out, color outside the lines. And so we seek comfort. That's not safety.
Right. That's protecting the status quo, not protecting ourselves. And
Uh-huh.
we know as coaches that we don't grow without discomfort,
Right. Right.
right? We
And
don't,
and
if
it's
we
a
go to the gym, if, go ahead,
right.
please.
Well, I imagine when you're working with your clients that part of what you do quite naturally is that you create a foundation of safety, deep, deep safety, paired with your presence of this stillness and peace. And from that place, anything is possible. But not every coach or every leader knows how to create those conditions. Um, that's when you get into a lot of transactional stuff. But creating conditions of safety, connection, peace through your care and presence, that makes anything possible for people that you lead or people that you coach or your family
Mm.
or your friends. Yeah.
And I really appreciate that distinction between safety and comfort. I actually was speaking with a client about this not too long ago, and she was talking about psychological safety and the importance of that in her leadership philosophy. And I reflected back to her and said, well, hang on a second, psychological safety isn't the same as keeping everybody comfortable. And she said, wait, what's that? And we wound up in this delightful jag on this. And what does that really mean? Because if we're wanting to encourage, if we wanting to be more inclusive, invite different opinions, there's going to be more conflict. It's going to be uncomfortable. And
Yes.
how to create psychological safety for different views, um, uh, recognizing that it's going to get messy.
Mhm.
And I think that the talk about safety and connection and peace there, how do we create those conditions? I think about this particular model, if we overlay that onto conversations that can be messy, whether they're in an organization or cultural conversations with different sides of the political spectrum or Me Too or whatever it might be,
Mhm, mhm.
if there needs to be safety, there will not be comfort. And
Exactly.
how do we make peace with that? Not just to provide peace and hold space, but how do we make peace inside of ourselves and be secure enough to enter into a conversation knowing it's going to get sticky?
I love this. I mean, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. It's one of my favorite things to engage in because we've been raised in a power over environment that makes us fragile. We are very conflict averse and we're very scared to experience discomfort. We aren't taught how to experience discomfort. In fact, the whole spiritual new age industrial complex earns billions of dollars to keep us from feeling hard things. And we are rendered fragile and not robust. And, part of my work with people is one of the most primary things is to help them to descend into their body out, it all hangs out here, and yet all of the real juicy stuff is from the neck down, and to descend into their body and feel the sensations of being alive and feel the emotions, the pleasant ones, the unpleasant ones, and be with them rather than strategize to avoid them or to maneuver around them in some way, or to manipulate events so that you don't feel them. In point of fact, this is all about going down and in and really experiencing emotions as is. And this cultivates a kind of psychological robustness, which is what I'm more interested in. I'm far more interested in psychological robustness than maintaining psychological safety. Because in that robustness, then, like you say, that, you know, two places can rub together and maybe something new is possible because there's a willingness to collide in our differences. And we don't have to be good. We don't have to be perfect. We can even mess up. We can share an opinion and be a little bit jagged with it, and self-reflect and go, oh yeah, I was a little off there. But we've all become increasingly afraid to even take a risk in that way. So part of my work is in, I like to say, rewilding people back into a place where they're more fearless in the face of discomfort. It's a really exciting frontier to be on. So yeah, cool.
Definitely. Well, I mean, we both work with people in the corporate world and also people outside of that space. How do you talk about a concept like rewilding in the corporate world?
Well, these days about 90% of my work is virtual, and I I
Hmm.
I bring the energy and all of how the horses have taught me for the last 53 years. I bring that into my sessions, and to the best of my ability, I try to create conditions like the horses create and created for you, which is um, safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy with care and presence. I may not say the word rewilding because that's going to kick in a reactive stance in their brain. So for me, it's about um, trusting in holding the space of this care and presence, trusting that their innate desire and yearning to live more robustly and more authentically and more powerfully is there latent in them. And then it just steps forward, and they find their language and they find their freedom. And um because the secret is we're already wired that way. We're wired towards those things. We're wired to experience joy every day. We're wired to experience connection. The disconnect, the fragility, the power over is very much not a part of our natural way of being. And so when someone's body, mind, heart gets a taste of the permission to go in those more aligned ways, it just all happens. So, and then next thing you know, after 6 months of coaching, you've got a CEO of a Fortune 50 company saying words like rewilding, or whatever it is for them, and coloring out outside the lines and taking risks and getting far better outcomes for their organizations and what those organizations serve. And for me, I get really excited about that because I feel like companies are living organisms that can evolve. And if they can evolve like people evolve, then think about all the ways those organizations can, make a difference in the world with all the influence that they're able to make. So, yeah. And,
Yeah,
so
there's
that makes it, I'm curious for you too, Andrew, because, you're one of those people. You're very much embedded in that world. Um, and my way of framing things and my way of living my life could be very foreign to you. What was it that opened the door for you to step into a 56 million, I mean, to consciously step into a 56 million-year-old teacher? What opened the door for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm feeling a little spotlight here, saying, "Wait, this is about you. This is about me. This conversation." What I would say is that sometimes I think we just, and I experience this with a lot of my courageous clients too. That sometimes we just know that something's going to be good for us, and
Mhm.
if we have the sense to listen to that voice that says, "Give this a try,"
Yeah.
and it's interesting. I remember the first time I participated in a men's weekend, I was scared out of my mind. And what I recall is that my dear friend in Houston who said, "Hey, you've been on the fence about this a long time, and I'm going to be staffing this particular weekend in California, a few hours from where you live. Maybe it's time." And I said to him, "This whole thing freaks me out, but I trust you. Um,
Mhm.
let's do it. I'll do it." And so sometimes it takes the invitation of a trusted friend or a way shower of some kind, or just an intuitive sense that says, "I think this might be good for me."
Yeah.
So it was in part some conditions that you created to make it a safe invitation. Perhaps something inside of me that said, "This would be cool. Let's lean into this."
Mhm.
And this is where, I've talked with you about some of my work in spirituality and leadership, and I don't talk about spiritual frameworks. That's not particularly important, but the notion of what are the deeper spiritual dimensions of human beings. And these are things that are not taught as much as they're caught, right?
Right.
So this notion, right, this notion of like, okay, I have a sense, an invitation to participate in something that I know is true for me.
Yeah.
And the peace dimension of this is so important, and the presence dimension, which I do want to ask you about in a few more minutes here, is that there needs to be a sufficient level, some minimum threshold of presence that's provided by the leader, the coach, the horses. That when the horses are present or attentive, and I want to ask you what that means in your words and in your world. When they're present, then I'm more likely to lean in and risk a bit. So could you say more about that and how this plays out in your work?
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. Thank you. Um, so the horses and all of nature are present not because it's like the thing to do, it's not like the
The
latest
horses
app,
are trendy, right?
right? And it's not because they're simple animals. Their intelligence is off the charts, off the charts. Their sensibilities, the way they sense into things, and how they understand rhythms, and they can feel people's intention. If someone walks in and looks like, you know, neutral, but their intention is otherwise, I can read the horse and know exactly what that person's intention is. So, they are, as animals of prey, if they miss any cue at all, they become lunch. Whereas for a predator, if they miss a cue, they miss lunch. And are we predator? Are we prey? Well, we're both. We're omnivores. And I would say that our predatory nature, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, just like our lion nature, which is wonderful, has been overdeveloped. And, there's another side to it, which is our prey nature, which is highly sensitive, to be highly sensitive and to take advantage of all those neural network capacities of taking the world in. One has to be profoundly present and open to feel all feelings, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, because you don't want to miss the cue. And so it's about not missing a cue. And the cues are right now. The cues aren't a second ago, and the cues aren't in a second from now. The cues are right in this moment. And this moment right here now has so much to tell us about everything that's happening in our world in this moment. So that's part of being present. The other part is, and you were talking about energy. So when we're born, we're given a couple of things. We're given we're given energy, our attention, and time. That's it. We have somewhere to put our attention, somewhere to put our energy, and we have only so much time to live. And if we expend our energy by having a phone call with someone that we don't enjoy, or by saying yes to a project that really isn't life giving, you can't get that energy back. And so horses are masters at not expending energy unnecessarily. And what you'll notice with the lead horse is they're the ones moving the least, because they're conserving the most energy. Because if she wastes her energy, then when the time comes she has to get away from the lion, she doesn't get away from the lion. So energy conservation is absolute key, and should be and must be absolute key in running an organization. And yet, we're constantly, with all the bells and whistles dinging us on the computer screen and everything, we're constantly responding to artificial emergency and expending energy saying yes when we should say no, and all of this kind of thing. And we become incredibly depleted when all that energy could be happening for this moment to tune into what's happening right now. And so part of being present is about conserving your energy. For me to worry about the next 5 days, it just to even imagine doing that, you can already feel the energy draining out of your body, right? So how do you want to think? Where do you want to put your attention? All of this kind of slowly brings us back to present. That doesn't mean that you don't make a plan or reflect on something when you're doing a project, but you're doing it deliberately rather than just some default looseness habit of expending. So that's presence. That's a big, big, long paragraph about what presence is.
Yeah,
But
beautiful. And it sounds
yeah.
like what you're saying too is you're talking about being conscious of what we're doing with our energy. So if
Mhm.
I am worried about something in the future, I don't want to be stuck in that, but perhaps to pay attention, go, whoa, there's something coming up for me that's concerning about the direction we're going in, or something like that. Let me use that information and that sensation rather than just spitting out unconsciously.
Yeah. And yes. And you can take it a step further. And this is also in the book. You can bring yourself back to being present, drop into presence itself, drop into this moment that's connected to all of life. And if you risk to do that for a few moments, you might find that when you go back to that thing you were worried about, that you have a few other ideas about how to solve that problem. You've resourced yourself from presence. So
Mm,
for the horses, they're always going back to presence, back to presence. It's like an oasis they're always coming back to, because that's where they're connecting to not only themselves, but everything that's happening in this moment. It's cool.
yeah, that's beautiful. And I love the way you express that and how the horses demonstrate that, and how
Mhm.
you speak about that. And I'm thinking about some research that was done a few years ago. I talk about that sometimes in some of my work around, again, around spirituality and leadership. Some research that's been done about the impact of mindfulness on decision making, that 10 minutes of meditation over 2 weeks, I believe that was what was done with the study, um, reduces the incidence of sunk cost bias and decision making. And this all sounds very academic, which it is, coming from Penn and the research there. But basically, if we can clear our heads and be present in our minds, and we're talking about mindfulness, not necessarily nature, but there's connections, I'm sure, and you know much more about this than I do. If we can clear our heads, we can make better decisions. So
Yes.
and I think that's one of the reasons that mindfulness has become so hot and trendy lately, not less powerful, just more trendy,
Mhm.
um, because we recognize, and the data supports this, the research supports this, that we make better decisions. We
Mhm.
are better at doing whatever it is we need to do or would choose to do, because we can consciously be present and direct our attention there, to your point about attention,
Yeah, and we're sending a
because we've removed distractions.
Yeah, right. And we're sending a parasympathetic volley to the brain that just is bringing us into a better part of our brain, that releases different kinds of neurochemicals that make us more resourced. And I love that you talked about mindfulness, because I want to kind of punt a ball into that court for a second. A lot of people get caught up in like that. To be mindful, they have to clear their thoughts, and then they struggle a great deal to do that.
Hmm.
or they have to like find the peace, or kind of like calm down all the emotions. And to those folks, I would offer that this isn't about that. You can't stop your thoughts. That's what the brain does. So you're really just dropping into this moment, and whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, you don't have to like do this inner violence where you're trying to make something happen inwardly. You're simply coming to this moment, and an easy way in is just to feel that sense of aliveness that you feel, that sense of beingness, which may kind of be a slight vibration or whatever, and just be there and let the thoughts hit. Hey, no big deal. They're not going to do anything to you. Just be with those things, and that's just an easier way in than, I think, a misguided idea that you have to clear your mind, or somehow part the waves in some way.
Yes, and I agree with you. This notion, which I think is mistaken, and it's a really reductive and unhelpful, that oh, if my mind isn't fully clear, then well, then none of this doesn't work. It doesn't have any value.
Right.
I mean, that would essentially be like saying, well, if I can't run a marathon, then there's no point in my running a
Yeah.
mile every day,
Right. Right.
or something like that. No,
Right, and it makes your
yeah,
presence conditional, right? "Oh, I'm only present if, like, it's super calm and peaceful in here," and, like, no. I mean, you're always present, you're just not always aware that you're present. When are you not present? You're here, you're always here. When are you not here? So, you're just dropping into the fact that you are here, right?
yeah. Well, there's that awareness piece, right? That's one
Yeah,
of the big three.
yeah.
What do we do with that? Yeah. Okay, so you're smiling a little bit, which makes me think, in our last couple of minutes, what would you say about joy? Because that's the last part of the model, and you save it for last in the book. Could you say something about that, please?
Yes. Well, joy is, I think it gets sort of commodified and mislabeled a lot and misunderstood. To me, joy has nothing to do with happiness, although that can be a byproduct of joy. Joy is really more, comes from the ability to be robust in the face of discomfort and be willing to be present. All these things we've just talked about for this time together, to be present with our circumstances as is, to be present, deeply present, unconditionally present with our feelings and sensations and emotions as is. And it's a kind of, I think I use the metaphor, the color black, which is all the colors together, which makes black, and joy is like that. It's all the colors, all the spectrum of being alive: grief, happiness, sorrow, frustration, relief, all of those coming together, and that creates joy. And the only way, because you can't selectively numb out, you can't numb out frustration and anger and not also numb out the joy. So,
Hmm.
if you're gonna numb, you're gonna numb everything. So joy happens as a result of not numbing, of opening yourself to all of life as it is. And I put it at the end because it's through care and presence and creating conditions of safety and connection and peace and freedom that joy then erupts and can be a part of your life regardless of circumstances, even when things are really hard and difficult. But it requires courage to be open in that way. So
Hmm.
that's joy.
Beautiful. And it sounds like you're making a distinction. The words that are coming to me when you say it, you're making the distinction between uh, um, uh, um, gladness and fulfillment. It sounds like you're talking about joy as a state of really being fulfilled. And I can be very fulfilled without being glad, right? Or without being bubbly, or something like that. Happy at this moment, but more deep fulfillment. That's what I'm hearing. Does that fit?
Yeah, I think that's a nice comparison. Like there's a sweetness to grief, right? So it's really, it's a deeper sense of rightness in all of life. Yeah, and fulfillment's a great word. Yeah.
Hmm. Great. I'm looking at our time. Thank you for a very fulfilling conversation. I appreciate it. I look forward to continuing the conversation, and I encourage you, if you're watching, Flying Lead Change, get it now. It's wonderful. The audiobook, I have some friends and clients who bought the audiobook as well. I don't think you're reading that. Is that correct? You have a
It's not
reader?
me. No.
But they've gotten some serious good reviews. The person reading, so you chose wisely there. But thank you for sharing this hour with us, and we certainly welcome your questions you may have through the Inspiring Leadership app or otherwise, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you again.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks so much.